Hi, everybody. I just want to make sure. Okay. Maggie, can everybody see my screen? Maggie, can you see my screen?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody. Welcome to Special Education Thursday. This is our last one for just 2018 right now. We may try to sneak another one in for December. But my name is Molly Whalen, and I'm a longtime parent advocate in special education in DC. And we do Special Education Thursdays on behalf of Advocates for Justice in Education, which is the federally designated parent training and information center for DC around special education. And their role is to help parents navigate special education. And we decided to do Special Education Thursday webcast to try to take a bite-sized piece of different topics around special education, put it on a recording, and hopefully provide a little bit more information to parents and advocates and everybody out there. We're kind of doing almost a part 2 of our last Special Education Thursday, which was also about RSA, which is the Rehabilitation Services Administration. That's DC's VOC rehab agency. And not a lot of people, parents in special education, always know about it, but it's really a key piece to transition and life after school. So today is going to be about how DC parents can successfully navigate RSA in DC for your transitioning youth. So if you have a youth who, a teenager who has an IEP, you know, it's all about that. And I'm so happy to be with Maggie Hart, who's a staff attorney extraordinaire at Disability Services. So Maggie, you know, I was just telling you that we always like to start to say, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into the work that you do.
Sure. So hello, everybody. I'm Maggie Hart, as she said, from Disability Rights DC, which is part of University Legal Services. University Legal Services is the designated protection and advocacy organization for individuals with disabilities in DC. So the organization as a whole, you know, engages in a variety of activities to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities to be included in their community and kind of live their most self-directed life. I have been doing disability rights or disability law for my career, and I actually got into this area prior to doing the vocational rehabilitation work. I did some special education work, and I really came to this area of law because I had a medical issue as a teenager, and I was out of school for about a year, and I needed to use a wheelchair, and I needed home instruction and the whole thing. So I kind of got involved in disability rights, got inspired by that experience and got involved in disability rights, and special education work led me to VOC rehab work, and that's how I got to be part of the Client Assistance Program, which is a program that was created specifically to help individuals, applicants and clients of RSA.
Wow, Maggie, I did not know that you had been an end user at one point in your life. So that's clearly why you bring such empathy to your role. And as people who've listened to Special Education Thursdays before know that we make this very DC-centric and really try to bring people that are working in the field here, and Maggie's one of the people that does that and is pretty involved and pretty knowledgeable. So without further ado, let's get into something that I think for parents in special ed is kind of a really weird sounding, I have no other experience with it, VOC rehab or vocational rehabilitation services. So
right, yeah, you'll hear it, VOC rehab services, vocational rehabilitation services, VR services, and in DC we call it RSA services. So all of those terms mean the same thing, and basically it's any service that the individual with the disability needs to secure competitive integrated employment. I want to kind of unpack that a little bit. So I want to talk about what competitive integrated employment means. So what is the goal? At the end of all these VOC rehab services, what should happen? What should happen is that the individual with a disability should be employed in a field that they want to work in, and also one that makes sense for them based on their individual strengths and needs and interests. And they should be employed at a competitive salary with the same benefits as anyone else that has a job. So that's what competitive means in this context. And integrated means they should be working alongside their quote-unquote typically developing peers. So it shouldn't be a segregated employment. Shouldn't even be like all the individuals with disabilities are kind of working in the back room and other people are working out front. It should be fully integrated, and people should be paid a fair wage for their work. And so that's the goal. The governing legislation is the federal law that created this concept of voc rehab services is, well, it was called the Rehabilitation Act. It's now known as the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. So that's another acronym. There's a lot of acronyms, just like special education. That if you hear that tossed around, people are talking about vocational rehabilitation services. And in DC, the agency that is required to provide these services is the DC Rehabilitation Services Administration, which, as the previous presenters explained, is part of the DC Department on Disability Services. They're located down at 250 East Street, and they do have, open walk-in hours, or you can also call them if you want to connect with them, you want to refer somebody, or you just have questions.
So, and the thing that I think, just to kind of make sure everybody's clear, is this is a federal program. So that means every state, has these, and so DC. And so I think, thank you so much for unpacking all that, because I think those are terms that you start to hear if you have a student in special education as they're growing up, but not knowing, how it connects. And just FYI for our neighbors, Maryland's RSA is basically called DOORS. So sometimes you'll hear that here and not know what that is. So and also I think it's really important to reemphasize for parents that RSA and these VR services are not just for students with disabilities, they're for anybody with a disability, right, Maggie? So
correct, yeah. So we'll get into this a little bit in upcoming slides, but there are pre-employment transition services and there are general vocational rehabilitation services. And the general vocational rehabilitation services you can get beginning at 14 if you need it, but there is no upper age limit, and they serve individuals with all types of disabilities. That's important as well.
And it's all geared towards employment and work. So anything goals or anything related is about getting a student with a disability or a person with a disability back in or into the workforce, right?
Absolutely, yes. So to secure, maintain, or advance in employment. But all ultimately regarding employment. Employment is the ultimate goal of pre-ETS, the pre-employment transition services, and voc rehab services. Yeah.
So I've got your slide. Do you want to talk a little bit more about pre-ETS and maybe also in that too, who qualifies in DC, for all of these services? Who can get them?
Sure. So the way I kind of set this up in my mind and the way it's laid out is hopefully the way that families will first encounter RSA. And the first way that families and students will interact with RSA is through, or should be through, pre-employment transition services. So those are services that are available to all students with disabilities, age 14 to 22, who are eligible or potentially eligible for the general VR services. They have to be in school. It can be any type of school. And they need to have an IEP or a disability under Section 504. And what this pre-employment transition services are relatively new. And what it means is that students in schools can get these pre-employment transition services, which, Molly, if you want to hop to the next slide, I think it says what they are. Yeah, okay. And they can get these services before they apply and go through the eligibility process for general vocational rehabilitation services. The services outlined here, can be provided individually or in groups. They're supposed to be provided by RSA counselors or RSA service providers. And that's okay. And it's just, I want to stress, because I think that one thing that families come to me with, and what I hear sometimes is, well, my daughter met with a RSA counselor in school, and she did this lesson on self-advocacy, or she worked in this kind of internship, and she told the RSA counselor about it, and now they're telling me that she doesn't have an individualized plan for employment, that she isn't part of vocational rehabilitation services. And the reason for that is that pre-employment transition services can and are provided to students before they apply for and before they are determined eligible for general vocational rehabilitation services. So just because your son or daughter is meeting with a vocational rehabilitation counselor in school does not necessarily mean that they have initiated the process for getting an individualized plan with generalized vocational rehabilitation services that's specific to them and specific to their personal employment goal. So you want to make
Yeah, that's what I want to say. And you may be covering this later, but it seems like a good time to ask. Can you talk about how somebody does that in DC, and if there are different ways to do that, to actually apply to RSA?
Sure. So to actually apply to RSA, you want to, there is an application link that's posted on RSA's website that's live. I do not recommend using that because they consider that to be a referral instead of an intake, instead of a full-fledged application. So you can complete that and sign it and send it in with additional information about who you are, but really you should connect with them, make a phone call and make an appointment and go down and meet with them. Bring information about your basic contact information, diagnosis of disability, and if you have an evaluation that says what the individual's vocational needs are, you can bring that with you and provide it to them.
Can a parent do that? Does the individual, the student, need to go as well, or how does that work?
Sure. So it is. They do have a person-centered approach, and the individual will need to sign the documents unless there's a power of attorney or guardianship type of situation involved. But generally, if the individual is 18 or older, they would be the person that is ultimately making the decisions and signing, the legal documents. Before then, I would advise that, if possible, the student and the parent go. Because it is supposed to be based on the student's kind of choice.
And something that you actually have to go down an RSA to do. It's not something that would happen at the school with an RSA counselor coming to the school?
It can happen at the school as well. So the RSA counselors are located in the schools, and they can do intakes and they can meet with families in the schools. If there's not, again, people don't call me when things are going smoothly. So I get calls when people don't know who the vocational rehabilitation counselor is, or the person is not as present maybe in the school as they should be. In that case, I would call them and make an appointment to go down. If you know who the RSA counselor is that's assigned to your school, or if you know who the special education coordinator is for your school, you can ask, because they should know who the RSA counselor is. You can talk to them about setting up an appointment at the school.
And so you really have to set up an appointment to do something. So it's not just a call and see who the counselor is. You really need to say, we want to apply for RSA, right? So
yes. Yeah. And they'll refer to it as an intake appointment. is what they call. But if you're there and you have, like I said, your basic contact information, something with your diagnosis and your needs, then that would constitute a full application for vocational rehabilitation services. So that next stage past the pre-employment transition
I want to
services.
stop and make sure we reiterate, because one of the things that I love that we do at Special Education Thursdays is give parents the right language to ask for things. So I want to make sure that if you have a student who's in school and you don't have an RSA application in, you want to find out who the RSA counselor at your school is. And I know Maggie's going to actually give a link available to those counselors, but you can also call RSA, and you want to ask for an intake appointment. Is that correct? Am I saying it right?
Correct. Yes. You want to let them know you want to apply for VR services. You would like an intake appointment.
And just real quick on this too, when's the best time to do that? So is it in the student's last year of school? Is it right after they graduate? When's the right time?
I would say earlier than both of those. I would do it at least in the junior year, at the latest spring of junior year. And one reason for that, and maybe the next, it might be the next slide, is the timeline for the process. So you go to you submit your full application, have that intake meeting. They have 60 days. They have 2 months from that day to determine whether or not the student or the individual is eligible. And then another 90 days from eligibility to create the plan. Okay. So that's up to 5 months to actually get the plan made.
And when would a parent know or a student know? Would they receive something in the mail? Would they receive a phone call? Like when would you hear, or how would you hear?
So once you've applied, as I said, they are required to determine eligibility within 60 days. They are required to send you a written certificate of eligibility, it's called. It will be from a vocational rehabilitation counselor. It will say certificate of eligibility at the top, and it will say whether or not you've been determined eligible. There's a second document in there called an order of selection document, which will tell you essentially what category, as far as level of disability they've kind of determined the individual is at. If you are denied eligibility, if they deny it, that is an appealable issue. My office represents individuals on appeals, both informal appeals at RSA and more formal appeals to the Office of Administrative Hearings. But you should also receive notice of your appeal rights that explain those different processes and the deadlines.
Maggie, can I ask a quick question? Is this, just to clarify for DC, is this process the same regardless if a student is in DCPS or a charter school or a non-public school, or is it different?
Yes, it is the same.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you receive it in writing, as I said, the eligibility certificate, the order of selection document, and, excuse me, the notice of your appeal rights. And if you've lost this PowerPoint by then, the client assistant program phone number is in the notice of appeal rights.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Mm-hmm. Great. And we will also put, as everybody knows, Special Ed Thursdays recordings and the video of the PowerPoints are at AJE training recorded webinars. We'll have that. Okay, so just want to get into the IPE creation. So let's say everything works well and you've gone through the application and you get the written certificate of eligibility and you're eligible. So what happens next?
Great. So then you will be contacted by the assigned vocational rehabilitation specialist, and there should be a meeting to create the IPE. So you want to know, you need to know at that point kind of what type of employment you want. They are required under law to identify a single specific employment goal on the plan. So sometimes that can be a challenge, especially for youth in transition, to decide what they want to do for their career. But they are required to put something in there. So you want to have an idea going in what you want for the employment outcome. And then if you've identified some trainings that you think are appropriate that could get you to the level where you would be able to be employed, you can discuss those with your voc rehab counselor. And then they create the plan, and you should be able to review the plan, and they'll create the plan on their computer in the meeting. But you can say, hey, can I look at that and read it and review it before I sign it?
Okay.
You have the absolute right to do that. And then they give you the little electronic signing pad, and you should sign it if you agree with it. They can sign it, and you are entitled to a copy of it.
Okay.
So in my experience, it is not routine for them to provide a copy, but you should certainly ask for one. And you should keep it. Keep a copy of all records.
And so this is a good time to stop, because I feel that most parents maybe coming through this process probably by this point are familiar with an IEP. And there's clearly a different level of rules and regulations for the IPE. So with an IEP, you get a copy of it with so many days ahead. You can review it. Schools will be, usually pretty good about making sure you have a copy, but it's very different clearly with an IPE. So I think it's a great time to say to parents and self-advocates who may be listening that you have to really step up your game and ask for a copy of these things, ask to review. You don't have the same kinds of maybe spoon feeding that you would get with an IEP.
Absolutely. I think self-advocacy is critical throughout the entire IPE creation, with regards, starting with the employment outcome, then identifying those programs that you think would be appropriate to meet the individual's needs, and being able to articulate how they meet the individual's needs, and then, yes, even advocating for a copy of documents related to the file. If they're unable to give you a copy, then they can scan and email it to you. They technically, you have a right to the entire file. You have to make the request in writing. But so if you ever, lose it, you can just ask them for it again, and they should send it to you. Perfect.
But you have to ask. This is a great time to be a self-advocate. Okay, so we've got IPE. Do you want to go into VR services that, what an IPE would look like what would be in it?
Sure. So what will be in it will be definitely counseling and guidance from the VR counselor, which I didn't put up here. What I have in the slide is not an exhaustive list of the services by any means. It's much more comprehensive than this. These are the ones that I think I see most often with youth in transition. So that's why I put them up here. But I'll start with the evaluations. Again, not an exhaustive list. Any type of evaluation that the individual needs to determine eligibility. So just to back up a little bit, if you go to that intake meeting and you don't have a document that explains how you're eligible or your specific vocational needs, RSA can and should do one to figure that out. But then if you need an assistive tech, psychological, psychoeducational, functional capacity, vocational, any of those types of evaluations, RSA can do that to figure out the individual's needs. They can provide things like job coaching, supported employment, job placement, benefits counseling, and support for post-secondary education is something that I have cases around quite often. And so that can include tuition, book supplies, transportation, assistive technology, and maintenance.
Would also cover these things, maybe certain programs, like a project search program that we've talked about here on Special Ed Thursday, or other kinds of school to work programs. Are those? And there might be
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So college, community college, workforce development programs, school to work programs, anything that provides the training that the individual needs in order to be, employed.
Okay.
So even remedial courses if necessary.
But that goes back to the original goal, the work-oriented goal on the IPE. So it has to match what you're asking for in services has to match your goal. So if your goal is to be a plumber or work in plumbing, you can't then ask for services that would be art school, right?
Correct. Exactly. Or if you, I'm trying to think, I often default to law school, but if you want to be a psychologist, for example, you don't need a law degree. So they're not going to pay for that next stage of going to law school. They're only going to pay for something that if you want to be a lawyer. It's the same way. They're not going to pay for more or provide support for more credentials than the individual needs to be employed.
And also these things should we talk a little bit about these things have to be available in DC, or you can get
Sure. Yeah. Right. So there is a term within the VR world called comparable services. And what that means is RSA is permitted to and required to really look for locally available programs that will meet the individual's needs. And so and publicly available. So, for example, if you want to go to college or even a job to work program, like you were talking about Project Search. Project Search is a great example, actually. There are programs in other states. If a student wants to go to one of the other states but could get their needs met in DC, then RSA is permitted to say, listen, you can go wherever you want, but we're only going to provide support at the amount that it would cost for you to go in DC.
Okay, so you still can choose to go where you want, but you're only going to get the level of monetary support that's equivalent to what you could get in state.
Right, that's the very basic. Everything is individualized kind of fact investigation and analysis. So if you have further questions about that, you can certainly give us a call.
Okay, we're deep diving. Probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, trying to. Yeah.
And we covered what you wanted to cover on benefits counseling and funding.
Yes. Yeah, benefits counseling is there.
So tips for parents, I always ask what's the one or number one thing that you want a parent to know, or what are your tips for parents walking through this process?
Sure. So we covered some of these already, like you must be a self-advocate. That pre-ETS and generalized voc rehab services are not the same thing. That you do not automatically get an individualized services if you are part of the pre-ETS in school. Some other things, keep your records and follow up in writing. Okay, and I highlight keep the records because sometimes RSA uses an encrypted email service, and those emails expire. You will not have access to them after a certain amount of time. So you actually have to print them out and keep them somewhere. Again, you can request a copy of your file later, but I just always say keep emails.
Okay, so it's not emails in your system, but make sure you're printing out or having a hard copy.
Yeah, if it comes through in an encrypted email, I would say print it out, keep a copy.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. The other thing is anytime you request a service and RSA says no, they should issue a written decision letter that says we're saying no to the service. It should say why they say no, and it should have your appeal rights attached.
Right. So, and then that's when, a parent or a family, you'd recommend them to get in touch with you or another organization that is going to support their appeal.
Absolutely. And it's important to know that there are appeal deadlines, and the deadlines are strict. So, for an informal administrative review, it's 10 business days. So you want to, get in touch with an advocate or attorney quickly to figure out what the next steps are for you. And the other one is actually something I wanted to mention based on the last Special Ed Thursday that was done. They talked about how the RSA counselor is a good idea to have them at the IEP meeting for the student, and I completely agree with that. The RSA counselor can and participate in the IEP meeting and talk about, the transition services. But in order for that counselor to be there, they must be invited in writing.
And who does that invitation? Is it the parent, the student, the school?
The school can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just important because of privacy laws, they need a written invitation.
Okay, great.
And I do think it's a good idea for them to attend.
That's it. And that should be probably before the last year as well. That should probably be in the junior year?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. And then tell us, I think you covered about the pre-ETS and VR services on an IP are not the same thing. Is there anything that you would love for parents to think about pre-ETS? Is it even the basics of asking their child's teacher if they're doing pre-ETS and what they're doing?
Yes, you can absolutely ask them if they're doing them, what they're doing. If you don't know who the vocational rehabilitation counselor is assigned to the school, I have included a link to the list, but you can also talk to the school's special education coordinator if there is one. They're supposed to, and they should know who's assigned to the school.
Great. And I think you've mentioned this already, but it's worth kind of highlighting to parents that these pre-ETS programs are new. So it's something to ask about, it's something to learn more, and I'm sure there'll be the types of programs that RSA is doing for the schools will probably kind of change in the next couple of years too.
Yes. Yeah, and I think sometimes students don't even know that that's what they're participating in too, because it can be a group setting. Right. So it may be like a presentation that they sit on, and they don't realize that that's what's going on.
Kinds of things, how to prepare for an interview, how to, good workplace skills. So they may not be even connecting it to the pre-ETS. So
absolutely.
We're getting a little close on time, so I really want to get to the resources and next steps. I've got your slide up that gives the great 3 next places to go. As we've always talked in Special Ed Thursday, we don't try to inundate you with hundreds of contacts, but just a couple of other places if you want to learn more or you want more information about what we've talked about. So Maggie, if you could go over those 3 that you've listed for us.
Sure. So the first one is, a little plug for my own program. So it's the Disability Rights DC Client Assistance Program. And we represent individuals, like I said, applicants and clients of RSA, all disabilities, and throughout the kind of their life with RSA. So from 14 upwards, we take cases for individuals at any age. It's important for people to know, again, if you're listening from Maryland or another state, they also have a client assistance program. Every state has one. So you can just Google Maryland Client Assistance Program and contact information for your state should come up. The next one that I listed is the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, WINTAC. I think that's a great resource. The actual law is up there, so it may be a little bit, if you put more technical, but if you wanted to do a deep dive into some of the federal regs, you can go there. And the last is the list of RSA VR counselors in schools that they're assigned to. And that may be a good next step for people who don't know who's assigned to the school or who to contact. You can start there.
All DCPS schools, probably high schools, and DC public charter schools are on that list, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So every parent listening, if you, I'm going to read this one off because I think this might be helpful. If you're not watching and you're only listening, it's the RSA VR counselors assignments by school, and it's available on the dds.dc.gov website. You can probably do a search on VR counselors, but the specific little link is node, NODE, /741712. And if you also are listening, you can go to AJE's website and archived webinars and click on this and be able to move to the next list. So
yes.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm also putting up on the screen Maggie Hart's contact information, where she's located, how to email her, how to phone her. And I think that I'm speaking for everybody that If you have questions about RSA, if you're wondering how this work and employment piece fits with your student, it sounds like the best advice that Maggie's giving us all is start early. Do not wait until graduation. Do not wait until their last year of school. Do it in the junior year. And if you get any no's along the way, make sure you react right away and call someone like Maggie at Disability Rights DC or get some help. But these are things that you can't sit on. I think it seems like with RSA and these services is a very timely piece, and you really have to be ready to go both as a parent and a self-advocate for our students.
Yes, absolutely.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Maggie. And everybody, as I said, this looks like it's going to be our last Special Ed Thursday for 2018. We'll post the new schedule, I'm sure, in a couple of weeks. Go to AJE's website, let me put it up, www.aje-dc.org, and go to trainings and archived webinars, and you can see our whole list of Special Education Thursdays. I think we're up to about 30 or plus. Maggie, thank you so much, and we appreciate everybody's help. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Molly. Bye.